to the video. Today we're going to be talking about the new Trilogy format released by FFG recently. Let's get into it. So the Trilogy format is very similar to standard Premiere in deck building. You build 3 like normal Premiere decks, 50 cards, no more than 3 copies of a card in your deck, all that normal stuff. But there's no sideboards for any of your 3 decks. You don't do any sideboards, and you have to use 3 different leaders as well. And then the biggest deck restriction is there is a limit of 3 copies of a card between all of your decks. So if you're playing Surprise Strike, for example, there can only be 3 copies of Surprise Strike spread through your decks. So you could have 1 in each, 2 in one deck, 1 in another, or all 3 in one of your decks. You just can't have more than 3 in all your deck lists combined for your Trilogy setup. And FFG did also recently say that Trilogy will have a separate suspension list, and that suspension list is currently empty. So you can play Boba from set 1, and you can play Django still, Triple Dark Raid, DJ. You can play all those cards for now. I mean, they'll probably get banned at some point, but you can still play them for now, and you can have fun doing it. And then on to the gameplay on how you actually play Trilogy format. You show your opponent your 3 leaders and your 3 bases, and then you both simultaneously pick 1 to ban, and then you set it aside and it won't be used for the rest of the round. So I recommend probably the best thing to do is like write it down somewhere just to prevent any kind of cheating or whatever. And then just like show each other what you wrote down. And then you both, again, simultaneously pick 1 deck you are going to play. And then you play a standard Star Wars Unlimited game, best of 1. So in this example that I have on the screen, I had 3 Trilogy decks. 1 is Barris Blue, Cal Kestis Red, and Boba Green. Let's say they ban the Boba Fett Green. I am not allowed to play that deck in this round. We can essentially pretend that it doesn't exist. And so then my options between playing Barris Blue and Cal Red. So let's say for this example, I'm going to play Cal Red. My opponent picks whatever deck they're gonna play. We play our best of 1, and let's say that I win. Once I win, I have to switch to play my other deck, which in this case is Barris Blue. And then if you lose, so let's say my opponents that in this hypothetical scenario, they have the option to switch with their deck, which can be kind of important, as we'll see later in the video when we talk about that. And the goal is to win with both your decks. So you want to win and then win again. So that does kind of make it, well, it makes it a 2 out of 3. You just have to win with each deck once in any order, and then once you win with it, you are done with that deck. And so let's talk a little bit of strategy. After winning your first game, it may be a good idea to switch your decks, potentially if the second deck you have is better for the deck that you're going to play against, because now you know what deck they're against. And it could be better because they just saw everything in your deck you just played, so they can kind of know what that's going to be like a little bit more, and they haven't seen your second deck. So you'll both be kind of going in blind, which leads into our first point. Off-meta decks may be more powerful in this format because your opponent can't sideboard or prepare for that same deck again if you win. So let's say I'm playing like Akbar Data Vault and I just like destroy them because they had no clue my strategies and how that game was going to go because they've never played against a deck like that. that can be a very powerful strategy and something you definitely want to think about, because once you win, they can't sit there and think like, okay, let's prepare for that not to happen again. That doesn't happen because they're not playing that deck again because you won with it. Now, if you lost with it, on the other hand, then they could prepare for it. So that might be bad, but hopefully you just win the first one, right? And then suspended cards, Django, Boba, Triple Dark Raid, DJ, they were suspended for a reason because they were really good and just unfair to play against for the most part. So it could be a very valid time right now to play them, at least until they're potentially suspended from this format if they go a little too crazy. So you can just literally just play the Django Tarkin Town deck that you were playing in Premiere with Triple Dark Raid and do all that stuff, and that could be a totally valid thing to do. And when building decks, you shouldn't be thinking very hard about the cards you want in multiple decks if you are contemplate rethinking your legions and aspects. So as an example from that point, I probably wouldn't play the Django leader and Boba 1 because they're both cunning villainy and they're both kind of wanting some similar cards. So if you have two decks you want to play but they share any more than probably 3 cards with each other, I would probably think about not playing those decks, just because picking one to have the cards over the other makes that deck better and the other deck worse. The only time this could not be the case is if those cards have like copies of each other, like Surprise Strike and Breaking In. If you had two decks that wanted to play Surprise Strike, you could probably put Surprise Strike in one and Breaking In the other, or just like do a mix of Surprise Strike and Breaking In both. And that could also be good because they're such similar cards, it'll probably still work. So if that's the case, you can probably still do it. But if the cards don't have valid replacements, you probably will want to pick different decks. And then another thought is playing all of one deck style. So like playing all control decks, and then the strategy going forward after you're playing all control decks is to ban their aggro deck, because their aggro deck would be really bad against your control deck. And then you have a higher chance of winning, unless of course they have a bunch of control decks that they brought. So we'll kind of have to see if this strategy works moving forward as people play Trilogy format more. We'll probably have a lot more information on this after Worlds, because it seems like a lot of Trilogy format will be played at Worlds. But it could be completely valid, and it could be something to think about as well. And a strategy for deck building would be to play 2 completely different decks, as in like I could play a Cunning Vigilance deck that's in Villain, and I could play a hero deck that is Command and Aggression and just like complete opposites, and then build one deck with what I have left, but find the best thing. That's could be an idea, but what I think is probably more valid would be picking 2 decks that have a shared aspect between them, but having one villain and one hero. And then if you're using mainly hero and villain cards in the decks, you won't have shared cards between them most likely. And then you'll have a lot more options of your last deck to do. And you could, of course, if we look back at my example from earlier, the 3 leaders, I had Bears Blue, which is yellow, blue villain, and Cow Red, which is yellow, red hero. And these decks work because both of the decks are using a lot of the cards from either hero or villain in their aspects, and that makes it so that if I play other decks, I have a higher chance of being able to play them. So I probably don't have to play a double aspect deck. That's just the one I chose. But you have a lot more options. Like your command deck is probably going to be really strong in this example because you have all of the command cards to work with. And then of course you could do what I did in the example, is pick a mono deck to then just have unlimited cards in those aspects you have to choose from, because nothing in that aspect was picked in your other decks. And then storage. Storage is a little more difficult for Trilogy format than it has been for other formats, because you can kind of just bring a single deck box or a double deck box and make it work. Aside from Twin Suns, a standard single deck box didn't fit a whole deck, so they made they made the Twin Suns single deck box. And then, so it'll probably end up being you're taking at least 2 boxes probably if you only have the Star Wars Unlimited Gamegenic products. But if you have something that holds 150 sleeved cards, then you could bring it all in one box. And I would highly recommend having a box that does this if you're going to play Trilogy format, because it takes up a lot less space. And if you're playing with multiple people, like at a game store or a convention, then it just makes it so everything is less crowded on the table. I would also recommend you have different sleeves for all 3 of your decks to avoid confusion as well. So, for example, I got this deck box super recently, so I haven't put all my cards and stuff in it quite yet, but I would recommend something like this, because just like, look at this. This is 2 Premier decks right here, and there's this case here. It's currently just holding a base, but it holds 2 decks here with plenty of wiggle room for other stuff you want to put in, and then another spot here that I can put cards. So I could easily fit 3 Trilogy decks right here, and I still have this spot for dice and tokens, and it has this case for my leader right here. So this is definitely something I would recommend if you don't currently have a deck box that you like for Trilogy format. Other than that, double deck pods and single deck pods definitely still work. And that wraps it up for today's video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe, and comment down below anything else you want to see for our next SWU Explained topics.